up with question 1.
Sheila got the short stuff.
We
both go. Oh, did we trade?
We did.
Oh, we
So
traded. I
you
didn't
now
know.
go first.
Oh, I see how this goes. Okay. So interim city manager Burton, what is your experience advancing diversity, equity, and inclusion? And how would you train leadership on that role they could play in advancing these initiatives, on the role they can play in advancing these initiatives?
Well, thank you. I think I'd have to start with my mom. I'm not going to go into a whole lot of detail, but she certainly taught us kids that respecting all people was just a fundamental core belief in our family. I was chief administrative officer back in the early 90s when Lewis and Clark County passed its first non-discrimination ordinance. And, I think that looking around the country today and for the last, for our entire history, but particularly in the last decade, this issue has become very, very prominent in the way that we treat each other and the way that we operate in this country. All you got to do is turn the news on every single night, and there are issues that are not okay. And, I can tell you that it's part of my past experience. I had the opportunity to sit on the board of directors of the National League of Cities. And, it wasn't too far after the point in time where George Floyd was murdered. And we had a board meeting to discuss not only that issue, but what's going on around the country. And there was a context too, particularly, not only at the federal level, but at the local level, where respect seemed to be going away in the way that local governments and state governments conducted their affairs. So we thought it was important at the National League to be a leader in terms of race equity and leadership. And we actually funded a national program through the National League to hire experts and put together programs that can be replicated throughout any organization, particularly cities, but any organization that wanted to participate. And I think it's been money well spent. There's more work to do at the national level, including the fact that we were able to participate. I think 14 cities nationally are doing an assessment on race equity and leadership throughout the country. I think they've met once or twice. And that's to assess the program that's been put together. And again, I think it's just top-notch folks that work in and run that program. And so, with actually early on in my tenure as the interim city manager, I met with the mayor and said, hey, here's the program. And I think that we should participate, and introduced the mayor to Clarence Anthony, the executive director of the league, visited about it. And then the mayor and the city attorney and the HR director are all part of that assessment team, which I think is very important. In terms of advancing these initiatives, my recommendation would be, as you well know, that we wait for the assessment to take place at the national level and take what's learned through that assessment and bring it home. And that way we've done our homework. It's been well vetted on a, I think, thorough basis. And then we can talk about what we learned with the governing body and with the management team and our entire staff, and talk about how would we roll this out on a city basis. Not only the discussion would not only be limited to how do we do that in-house, but how would we approach it on a community-wide dialogue as well. And those decisions are yet, I think, to be made. I think we're in the definition stage, the assessment stage. But I know that good work's being done, and I look forward to the work product when it's completed.
Follow-ups?
Thank you. The city of Helena has had an objectively high number of new city managers and interim city managers in the last 5 years. As a result, staff may be feeling uncertain about another change to the city manager position. What would you do if chosen to allay those concerns internally? And what experience do you have in helping staff maneuver new leadership and the inevitable discomfort it creates in the team?
Well, it's kind of a unique position to be here as the interim city manager for the last 11 months. So I can tell this team that you wouldn't see any dramatic changes based upon the way we've conducted our business the last 11 months. But I think for the long term, and when you look at not only the relationship between the governing body and the directors, but the relationships between ourselves, that to be truly effective for the long term, you need to establish relationships of trust. And, you know, you guys have all heard me, let's hire nice people. And, you know, empathy, compassion, humility, character, not only reflect what we do here in this room, but people that we work for throughout the community get a sense of those values as we walk through our daily and weekly jobs. You know, I think that it's important to, and I've had a commissioner that I worked for in the past that said, Burton, the one thing I love about you is you do what you say you're going to do. And the one thing I don't like about you very much is that you do what you say you're going to do. But you gotta say what you're going to do, and then you got to do it. And that means that not everybody's going to agree, and we can debate what it is that's going to be said. But we have to have priorities and a pathway. So I think it's critically important, and you guys know that you empower your directors and staff, the city manager in this role. Chief of staff is really kind of a generalist. You guys are the experts, and you know there's a different vantage point relative to the big picture that needs to be all tied together, and that's part of the city manager's role too. I think it's important to listen and to have the ability to change your mind, particularly when you're being advised by people that are talented, skilled, smart, etc. You know, it's critically important that, at least from this vantage point, that you give the directors the space to do their jobs. And that means not everything can be a top priority all at the same time. But when we establish priorities from the commission, you need to have the space to get that priority done before we move to number 2 or 3. And sometimes we have to multitask, but you know, you have to be realistic in terms of what your expectations are. And I think for the long term, it's really important that we all understand that family comes first. That if you got a situation going on outside the city with your family, that you have the space to deal with it and not have to worry about your job. I think that's a big deal. So results matter. Collectively, we get better results than we do individually. And I think as we've learned in the last 11 months that it's okay to laugh and have fun at work.
Thank you.
Okay.
Please explain your experience managing city infrastructure and what you consider the roles and responsibilities of the city.
I don't have any experience managing cities. I do have experience managing government infrastructure at the state, county, and the city level. Many years experience at the city level. I know that when I first came to the city, there were no CCIPs, capital comprehensive capital improvement plans. And it took 4 years to put all of that together. 4 years, and at the same time, we had recently invested in the GIS programs, and so we're not only building the program, but we were tying all of that infrastructure into GIS so that if there was a water pipe under the ground, you knew what age it was. So the first assessment that you do when you put together a CCIP is you need to know what you own, what condition it's in, and then it needs to be tied to a CCIP, which is essentially a strategic plan within a unit of our government. And that gives you the ability, because we all know that whether it's property taxes or water fees or sewer fees or open space management fees, it all comes out of the same pocket. And those resources are not unlimited. So in order to take limited public resources and apply them to the greatest need, you need to know what you own and what condition it's in. And so when you go through that discussion with the governing body, and that capacity grows every year when you got that structure in place and you review it, and you got to modify it because things break that you don't anticipate and all of that. But I think what you end up with are good discussions as to what's the level of service, what do the rates need to be, and what are we going to fix next? And we're talking about significant amounts of money. And I know that I talked to Ryan on our tour today. But when you put together replacement values for insurance, you put a dollar value to something. In the water system, just the water system in Helena has an insured value in excess of $1.5 billion. So it's a big, expensive, valuable asset that the city has. And it's our responsibility to manage it and keep it up and running over time. So I think too that really in all areas of our business, but strategic partnerships are important. I spoke earlier today about the old days when earmarks were available and Baucus was the chairman of finance, and we'd go back and say, Senator, here's what you gave us last year. Here's what we said we were going to do. Here's what we did. And here's what we would ask for this year. And here's what we're going to do. And if you didn't do it, you didn't get any money. That system actually worked pretty good. And including all the interstate improvements and all of that. So that doesn't exist, but the strategic partnerships with our delegation, with people at the federal agencies and at the state agencies are critically important when we're looking at infrastructure dollars and all the future opportunities that we have in front of us. And one of the opportunities as we work our way through the next budget process is to take it to the next level with the structure that we put together that talks about rates. And here's, if you raise it by 1%, here's what you can do. And that goes to projects relative to what we own and what condition it's in. And so I think too, and we've had discussions that our capacity with engineers has been really stretched because we can't recruit in this market. So what do we do to not leave money on the table? And that's where we're engaged in discussions with Great West Engineering to bring their grant and engineering capacity to play to help us out until we can start recruiting engineers on into the future. But that directly relates to managing infrastructure and the opportunities that exist at the state and federal level. So I could probably go on, but I'll leave the answer right there unless you have further questions.
I might have a couple just to talk about your experience. What is your experience with the role of infrastructure, managing the infrastructure and government regulations of everything that goes on with wastewater discharge permits, water rights, just dealing with government and how we move forward?
So you're going back to the TMDLs and all that. And it's when we talk about affordable housing, I think it's a house of cards that we built in Montana. And it has directly related to water rights, exempt wells, and the quality of water that we discharge either through the wastewater treatment plant or directly into the ground. And the standard from the state of Montana for the last couple of decades has been to shift that cost onto municipal treatment plants as we build thousands of lots with wells, exempt wells and septic tanks. And there's some bills up there. I think one's going to be heard tomorrow, where senior water right holders who are protected by the Constitution can't appeal any use of water, particularly all these water wells that are taking place. I've seen the numbers where a domestic well goes in, 95% of them are domestic and the septic tank goes with it. So we've already got studies and have had for several years on water quality issues. And there are conclusions by the EPA and DEQ that the 10 or 12,000 septic tanks in the Helena Valley are degrading Montana ground and surface waters, and that's in non-compliance with the Clean Water Act. So what happens to those homeowners if that's ever adjudicated and the judge agrees that you're not in compliance with the Clean Water Act? Cease and desist. Well, they're going to be coming to the city and say, hey, can we hook up? Or they're going to be saying we need to create a sewer district and make our own plant. And we're talking about the value of the water system at $1.5 billion. This is not an insignificant unfunded liability that exists on our borders. So the trend continues that they want to continue to force us to clean our water even more, even though the cost is huge and the results are minute. And when you look at the studies through the EPA and DEQ, based upon the other contributions that are outside the city, you can't clean water up anyway with that kind of minute improvement. So we stay engaged with DEQ. We try to kill bad bills at the legislature. And at least inside the city, we continue to do things right by building long-term sustainable treatment plants and maintaining our water rights and our contract with the Bureau of Recs. So we have water quantity that will allow us to essentially double in size from where we sit today.
Then I have one kind of follow-up to is goes with low-income housing is what is the relationship with infrastructure with developers as far as the liability and responsibility of each?
Well, I think there's challenges and opportunities in that regard. The developers need to pay for the infrastructure, and present city residents shouldn't be subsidizing development, regardless of what demographic you're trying to focus with the housing. But I think there's an opportunity in this legislative session to somehow hit the sweet spot with extending, and I know that through SRF that's been prohibited, in terms of extending sewer and water outside the city with a special program funded by the state that allows us to do that. And that would particularly be focused on affordable housing, I think. And of course, when the development takes place, they'd have to annex into the city because we passed an ordinance years ago that there's no variance. If you're going to use city sewer and water, you have to annex into the city. But then you've got sustainable development rather than a continuation of the 1 acre well and septic issue that's all over the valley. And we've already talked about that. So I think that there's opportunity in this legislative session to get that sweet spot. And I think it would be very advantageous for our ability to develop with strategic partners affordable housing. Did that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
Thank you, Tim. How do you describe your management style and ability to motivate the professional staff?
Well, and you guys will have your own views because we've been working together, but it's a participatory management style or a team style. And again, you need to empower your people. And I've learned over the years that people who are empowered to do their job and make decisions and do their job and get good results are motivated. So, between the governing body and this team, we establish priorities. Clear priorities, people have the space to get the jobs done and the results, and then we move down the road to the next priorities that are realistic, achievable, and measurable. And I spoke about a number of issues in I think it was the second question in terms of management style it was the second question. How do you create that culture? And really, we've talked about it in our meetings on not only do we need to stabilize the city, pass a budget, allocate ARPA, but at the same time, how do we reestablish the culture and the values that are sustainable for the long term? And I think that directly relates to the management style, because it's not just my values, and it's our values, including the commission. And the commission and even our own selves, when we're out eating dinner, bring back what the community's values are. And so, it becomes part of our discussion with the governing body. How do we sift through that? And what is the culture that we're creating here? But it needs to be purposeful, and it needs to be sustainable for the long term. And that then creates the working environment where you're able to recruit and retain good people. Results are coming in, and all of that plays into it.
Does anyone have any follow-ups on any of the questions we've asked so far?
You were hired to be interim.
Mhm.
So why is it that you considered this position now? And what are your goals for us into the future?
Well, I think a number of things go into that question. I've been asked by some people that I respect to pursue a position for permanent full time. I also made some commitments to the 4 directors that I heard since April. And each one of them through those interviews said, well, what are you going to do? And I made a commitment to each of those 4 people that I would put my name forward, and I feel an obligation to follow through with that. I think from my perspective, I always go back to the charter in terms of what I'm going to do in the future. The city mayor and commission make those decisions. They set the stage in terms of where we're headed with a lot of help from all of us. So it's not a city manager exclusive thing to do. I can talk about what we're going to do in-house, and I think you all know where we're headed relative to some of the earlier questions in terms of how we manage our affairs day to day, how we put together structure, how we work on permitting, our development review processes, the budget process. make that very predictable for making sure that the commission has good information before they're asked to vote on something. And I think there's a lot of work to do in that regard, but I also think that we have a heck of a lot of progress. And so I was rambling on. Did I answer both parts of your question?
Okay, any other? Thoughts? Right, I think we'll wrap up then the leadership interview. Mayor Manager Burton, again, want to thank you for participating and leadership. Want to thank all of you for the insightful questions and participating, and we will close.
Well, thank you very much. I appreciate your time. Thank you.
Please volunteer after all the interviews.
If you guys wouldn't mind hanging out just